Hello everybody and welcome to Legal Studies Unit 4, Area of Study 2, Law Reform Part 4. The focus of today's video will be dot points 4 and 5, the role of the Victorian Law Reform Commission and its ability to influence law reform, and one recent example of the Victorian Law Reform Commission recommending law reform. Let's begin by looking at what the Victorian Law Reform Commission is. The Victorian Law Reform Commission is an independent body that conducts research into existing laws. Essentially, what they do is they assess whether the laws are effective and they make recommendations to the Victorian Parliament on how these laws can be amended and changed. This aims to ensure that the legal system meets the needs and the aspirations of the Victorian community. Some of the roles of the Victorian Law Reform Commission are making law reform recommendations on matters referred to it by the Attorney General, making recommendations on minor legal issues of general community concern, and monitoring and coordinating law reform in Victoria. We will now look at some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses of the Victorian Law Reform Commission and its ability to influence law reform. Some of the strengths of the Victorian Law Reform Commission include that it provides independent advice and recommendations for change. Also, the government is the body who asks the Victorian Law Reform Commission to investigate the need for law reform. And this means that the recommendations can be highly influential to the Victorian Parliament. The Vlrc can make thorough recommendations as the members of the Vlrc do not have other obligations like members of Parliament who are a part of parliamentary committees. We will look at parliamentary committees in a later video and this will make sense a little bit more. Some of the weaknesses of the Victorian Law Reform Commission include that they can only investigate issues referred to it by the government. So this means there's limited scope to investigate major issues other than those referred to it by the Attorney General. It can also be quite time-consuming and costly to conduct these investigations. And the last weakness is that they are only recommendations. If the Parliament chooses not to implement them, that is their decision. Now we're going to look at some questions you should ask yourself when writing about a recent example of the Victorian Law Reform Commission recommending law reform. So I'm sure each student and each school will have a different example, which is why I thought I would just provide you with these questions to make sure that you have all the relevant information to include in an answer. So the first thing you should ask yourself is, when was the issue referred to the Victorian Law Reform Commission by the Attorney General? So always have a date and ensure that you remember that. When was the consultation paper released? When were the recommendations delivered? And how many were there? If you would like, you can remember a couple of the recommendations if you believe that will help your answer. I know for myself, I remembered about one or two. How many recommendations were accepted? And when did these recommendations come into effect? The last question is quite important. So what does this example illustrate about the Victorian Law Reform Commission's ability to influence law reform? So if your example had 40 recommendations, for example, and 39 of those were accepted, that shows that the Victorian Law Reform Commission does have a pretty good ability to influence law reform. Their recommendations were not only listened to, but they were implemented and accepted. That concludes today's video. I hope that your knowledge of dot points 4 and 5 from Unit 4 Area of Study 2 have been consolidated. As always, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel to be notified about future uploads. Thank you.